Okay, so you have already created this class called Java demo. Now, first thing, understand a class is consist of some variables, constructor and methods. Usually every class has that. So first of all, we'll try to understand all of these and then we'll move to advanced Java concepts. Okay, so first let's try to understand what is a variable. Suppose within this class I want to store students information like students ID number. Okay, so how I'll do it? I'll do it using a variable. So how we'll declare a variable? First of all, you have to write its data type. By the data type, it's mean what is the type of data that you're putting inside a variable. So let's say hey, when I'll write this line like int ID is equals to 10, then I mean here is that my variable is ID, its data type is int, and 10 is its value. Okay, every variable has a data type in front of it that defines what kind of data is stored inside a variable. So I'm storing an integer value, that's why I choose a int variable. If I want to store, let's say, student name, then I'll use the string. Okay, so I'll simply write string name equals to the name that I want to print, let's say Abhi. Okay, as simple as that. Now this variable has different types. There are some local variables, there are some global variables, as well as static and non-static variables. Okay, so all of this you'll get to know about in the coming session. I'll tell you what is local and variable in this session. Static and non-static concept will cover in the coming up session. Okay, so I'll come back to the static, local and the global concept, but first let's move forward with this example. So now for a second, just think we just have an ID in here. Now I want to print this ID in the console. I want to see the student ID in the console. So what I will do is, first of all, within this class I will create a method. Name of this method is main. Whatever you're seeing here is void, is its return type. Whenever you see this in front of a name of a method, that means there is no compulsion to provide a return. When we'll create a method, I'll tell you that what this void means, and also about all things, what are this public, static, keyword to. Okay, here it's an array. So all of this you'll get to know in the coming up session, but right now for your understanding, you can think main method as this is this particular block is the first block that will run out of this class. This class can have many methods, so many variables, everything, but this method right here, the main method, is the first that get executed. Okay, so all our initialization, all method calls are done inside the main. Now what was my objective? To print this student ID in the console. So this variable ID is present in this class called Java demo. So within the main I have to create the object of the class. Object is nothing but address to the memory location where this variable is stored. Okay, so how we create the object? Just write the name of the class, which is Java demo. Let's say obj is the name of the object. New, with the new keyword we do the initialization. Again write the name, Java name. It's Java demo, and here we go. Object is ready. Now if I use this object that we have just created, obj, then I have access to the property of this class or the variable of this class, which is ID. I click on ID. Now I have the access, and at this point just think about it that I just declared this variable. I'll tell you the difference between declaring and defining. So right now I just declared this ID. Okay, but if instead of just declaring it, if I define the value of it right here, if I'll give it a value, then it will be defined. Okay, so now I can simply say that obj.id equals to, let's say, 18. Okay, and using the display statement which is system.out.println, I can print this ID. So I'll simply say ID of student is, this is the string that I want to see in the output, and with the plus I will concatenate the ID. So simply say obj.id. Okay, do not get confused with this. I use this plus symbol is known as concatenation because I'm printing two things in the output. One is this ID, obj.id, and another is this string. So now if I'll run this program, in the output we'll see the student ID. So the ID of student is 18. This is what we have provided. Now problem arises when I have to put multiple IDs. Okay, so let's say again I'll say obj ID equals to 19, and again to print it in the console, again I have to use the display statement. Okay, and one more time if I say obj dot ID is equals to 20, and then again to print it I have to use this display statement. Okay, so I have three students ID and I want to print it. So each time I give it a value and use the display statement right after it. So when I'll run this, I'll see 3 output. But there is a problem here. There is a repetition of code that's keep on happening in this program. Again and again I'm using the same line. So this is the kind of practice that we should not do. So a rebuttal of this is the using a function. So why don't I create a common function that will print any ID of any student in the console? So how we'll do it? I'll create a method here. So how we create a method? First you have to, like for the variable you have to define a data type. For a method you have to define its return type, just like the data type. So if I write int print, let's say the name of my method is print ID. Okay, so here is my method, and you see I'm getting an error here, but it's saying the method must return a result type of int. So basically why I'm calling this as a not data type but the return type, because whatever you're defining here you have to return same values. If I write here, here I write return 0, then the error will be removed because I'm returning, this function here is returning a integer value. But what if you don't want to specifically want to return anything, right? So in that case we'll use the void. With the void we won't get any error. We can simply use a display statement here. So what do we want to print here is the int ID, right? And system.out, the same output I'll use from here, the same string I'll use here, not the object or the variable. Here I can simply say ID. So now I don't have to do this, all of this. I can quickly put it inside a block of comment, and now what I'll do, I'll simply call this method if. So from the object itself, again to access the variables I use the object. Again the function is a part of class, so access this function I will again use the object obj dot name of that method that you want to use. It's print ID, and you have to provide ID that you want to print. So let's say I want to print 18, and for another student, and for another student, so which has ID 19 and let's say ID 20. Now if I'll run this program, in the output you will see the same output what you were getting earlier, but you were writing this much code last time. Now using a function I directly called the function and print the ID. Simple as that. So that's why we use the functions. And now you know about the concept of return type and the data type also, how a variable works, how a function works. Now I'll come back to the point that I left in the starting, local and the global variable. So the variable that you have declared here is the global variable. Why it's global? Because if I create another function here, it can access to this variable also. Okay, but what if I define a variable inside here? Let's say within this method I define another variable string name. Then this variable right here, name, is not global, it's now a local variable. It's local variable to this method called print ID, because it it resides in between the bracket of this function. So that's why the string variable is local and it is global. It is accessible to the all the functions of this class. Okay, so this is very basic about how a variable works, how a function works. Now I'll talk about another very basic thing that is used, which is constructors in a class. First, let's try to understand that what is a constructor and why do we need it. So just think about it in this scenario. Like right now I was just printing the ID, but let's say we have more distinct properties of student. Okay, like the name. I'll just declare the name here, I'm not defining. And this data ID and name is different for different student. Both of these variables are different. So I can still use the function to print it, this way. I can add another variable here, name, but that is not a good practice, right? Like if each property is different, then I should create different objects. Okay, and I can do it in much better way using the constructor. I can separately do that also. I'll tell you after the constructor also, but the best way to do that is using a constructor. So I'll remove all of this. Okay, and now we'll see when we have two properties how an actual class is created using the variable, constructor and a function. So same thing I'll do. I want to print the student information, ID and name, okay, for different students, not for a single student, for different student, and we'll do that using a constructor. Okay, so how do we create a constructor? Just use this name of the class, which is Java demo, bracket close. Right here, this is your constructor. There are two types of constructor. There is a parameterized constructor, there is a non-parameterized constructor. By the parameter, nothing. When you'll put something inside a bracket, like I put this ID in the parameters of this function, if I put something here, then it will become a parameterized. If I'm not putting anything, then it's a non-parameterized. But when you make it parameterized, you will see the changes while you create the object. So I'll come back to the point. So I will initialize my ID and the name, okay, from the constructor this time. So I'll simply say int ID here and string name. Now there is a problem that I will do the initialization. By the initialization, what I mean, that I will give it value via constructor. Okay, so the problem here is the variable that I used here is same as like this, and I want to, in the backend, what I want to do is that this ID should be equals to this. So what I'll do, I'll simply use this keyword called this dot ID, okay, is equals to the ID. So if you hover over it, you will see that this ID is basically the instance variable ID. From the color itself it's clear, and it will be equals to the ID of this constructor. Same thing I will do here. This dot name, which is my instance variable name, is equals to the parameterized name variable. Okay, now you must be thinking, okay, fine, you did it, but where did you initialize it? So when you'll create the object for the class, you have to pass this values also. I'm getting an error now because now we have a parameterized constructor. So whenever you'll create a constructor and it has a parameter, those parameter will be passed when the object creation will take place in the main. So right here I will pass the ID. So here I can simply say ID is 18 and let's say name is Vernon. Okay, so this is, let's say, for the first student. Same thing I can do for the other students. You can create as many objects I want to, right? Each time a different copy of object is getting created. So let's say this has ID 19, this has ID 20, this has ID 21 and 22. Just change the name. Some random names here. Okay, alright, this was fine. So I have the object and I have a function also. Now this function was printing the id only, and that time too we were initializing from itself. Now we don't have to do it, we are using constructor for that. Main work of constructor is the initialization of variables that are present in the class. Okay, so now we are printing the id of student. In the same, I can add another string, name is, and just add that variable which is name. Okay, I created this, to make you understand. I'll just remove that. It's fine. Now with each object I can simply call that method and it will be printed. So I'll call the method called print id. Here we go. Okay, it's obj1. I'm sorry. Same thing I'll do for the obj2. Print id. Same for the obj3, which is the third student information, and same for the 4 and the 5. So now four and 5. So now when I'll run this, in the output I will see the same output with the name, but this time we didn't use we created different object for the different student, as they have different properties using a same class. So how this was all possible? Using the constructor. And how we avoid the repetition of code? Using a function. Now if I'll call this, in the output I'm seeing id of student is, okay, we didn't add a gap here. Okay, so it's saying id of student is 18, name is Varnan, this is the id, this is the name. Okay, as simple as that. So it's a very basic example how a class works, how a variable, functions, constructor works together in the class. So variable, basically to store something at some location by giving a name is a variable. Function is, to create a functionality that is common to avoid the repetition of code, and constructors are mainly used for the initialization. Okay, a better way of initializing these variables. When you create the object, you can also initialize the variables by creating a constructor, a parameterized constructor, and initializing with this keyword. And again, I'll tell you that why we have to use this keyword, because I use the same name. If you change the name here, if I say id number 1 and the name 1, then there is no need to use it. Then I can simply say here name 1, and I don't have to use this keyword. Again, it's the same thing, but this creates the confusion. You understand it, but if a new person sees it, it won't understand it. So that's why I took the name same and used this keyword instead. Okay, so now there is no problem with keeping it same. Okay, and it's fine now. Right, so this is the very basics. In the coming up modules, we'll discuss about more advanced concept that we need within the REST assured. Thank you.